So I haven't talked about free speech in a little while, so let's talk about free speech. And I do have a video out, the First Amendment, the Enlightenment, and xkcd. And this touches again on that xkcd comic about free speech. Now, I know my persuasion friends will say, you know, if you don't like this comic, why are you bringing so much attention to it? But I think it's one of those things where we need to really understand that not everybody, I'm not completely right or wrong, they're not completely right or wrong, this xkcd comic. Just do a search on Google for xkcd free speech, and you'll see this comic. I'm going to read the comic for you so you get a better idea of what they're talking about. And then I'll read my tweet. So this is Free Speech by xkcd. Public service announcement. The right to free speech means the government can't arrest you for what you say. It doesn't mean that anyone else has to listen to your bullshit or host you while you share it. The First Amendment doesn't shield you from criticism or consequences. If you're yelled at, boycotted, have your show canceled, or get banned from an internet community, your free speech rights aren't being violated. It's just that the people listening think you're an asshole and they're showing you the door. Now, this is a great point about the household aspect of free speech. I do believe in this sort of libertarian concept of free speech. I'm basically a free speech absolutist, and I agree with the author of xkcd that if you have a household, of course you can kick people out. Of course, if you have a subreddit or a Facebook page or a Twitter page, of course you can block people, mute them. You can, if you have a curated community, of course you can kick people out of that community. If you run a media company, of course you can fire people for whatever reason is you're legally able to. Okay, so we're not trying to say that, trying to limit freedom to do what you want to do with your company, your property, we have in this world of the internet, we try to apply libertarian principles. We try to apply the non-aggression principle when possible. Really hard on Twitter. But we have this thing called property rights. Okay, property rights. So people actually have their, we have the modern public square that is the full platform of, say, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit. They have these places where people can go, and then you have a household where people can, it's a bit more of an echo chamber. Now, tying back into what I said earlier in the video, responding to Orlando Soto's question about emotional economy, I do believe that we have, on this channel, we do advocate to sort of use echo chambers as a vacation home where we can feel better. We can feel like we have a bit more, our beliefs are being validated. They're being repeated. We're being conditioned, and the same messaging is passed through our neural pathways again and again and again, and we start to just kind of really double down on our existing beliefs. And then I say on this channel we should try to, as much as possible, use them as a vacation home and not as our permanent home. Our permanent home should be more intellectual, more just open-minded, open to experience, as Jordan Peterson would say. And it's ideal. I mean, some people actually talk to me about practicing what I preach on this. This channel is about, in many ways, about ideals, about calibration for not only my viewers, but for myself. I watch these videos sometimes and I go, yeah, let's get closer to that center bar that's been established in the video. And, sometimes over time you get bogged down in this or that, the irrationality of this, or your emotions cloud your judgment. But ultimately I try to calibrate my mind here, using this channel as a tool to get me back towards the center. And I like to, if you have any thoughts on how you're using the channel and how you've seen my videos, and if they've helped you at all, I'd love to hear your feedback. So definitely leave a comment below on that. But ultimately, people get into an echo chamber and they say, well, we don't want certain thoughts or ideas here, and it's totally all right to kick you out. And that's true. That is true. So the comic is absolutely correct. And the First Amendment, of course, does only protect us from government intervention in free speech and the modern religion of censorship. They can't censor us. So I then say, because we have to continue talking, it can't stop at the household, it has to go to the modern public square. When you see someone substituting this comic for an argument on censorship, ask them the following. Number one, is free speech a philosophical concept or just U.S. law? And number two, is the public square a platform or a publisher? Households are where this comic applies. Let's go to those questions. Is free speech a philosophical concept or is it just U.S. law? Well, it's a philosophical concept and it's U.S. law in the First Amendment. But it's a philosophical concept that has been pored over for thousands and thousands of years, talked about in the Enlightenment era, among others. But over time, we've actually been having tons and tons of philosophical discussions about it over the past 30 years. It's a philosophical concept. It's a human right. Free speech. The right to speak your mind, and of course, doing so in a manner where there is no authority figure to tell you what to say, what you can't say. That's free speech absolutism. There is no authority figure like myself defining free speech for you, what's allowed and what isn't. Now, of course, personally, as I have to recount, every time we talk about free speech, I'll tell you where some of my exceptions are. Of course, there's defamation, slander, libel, doxing, obviously unconsented pornography, credible threats, direct harm, fire in a crowded theater. These things are all exceptions to the free speech absolutism that I believe in. I don't think that people should be inciting violence through their speech. We talked a little bit about how words are not violence, but of course they can lead to violence, and that's what people's primary concern is. So, of course, I don't think that inciting violence, things that shouldn't be allowed. You shouldn't be rallying people's emotions to do things that are harmful and not very humanistic. So free speech has its limits. It's a philosophical concept, though. So when they use this argument to say, well, we want people censored, we want them removed from the platform, the publisher, however you'd like to define it, we'd like them removed from our place. We want them completely off of Facebook, completely off of Twitter. We want them depersoned, deplatformed from the internet. And I say, no! Gotta stop. Stop. Because they have the human right of free speech. Now, of course, the question then becomes, well, if they're being destructive, who is the authority? Well, the platform or the publisher. This is where the next question comes in, but we'll tackle that when we come to it. The platform or publisher makes that distinction. Are you being a credible threat? Are you being someone of direct harm? Are you defaming somebody? Are you slandering somebody? Are you libeling? Are you going to dox them? Are you going to destroy their privacy, which might be more of a Fourth Amendment violation, if the government has to try to prevent that? But they don't. We have the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. They're spying on us constantly. And with this coronavirus situation, it feels like, well, we could be on the slippery slope to a more authoritarianism. So I say, don't just go for the First Amendment. The First Amendment's backed up by the Second Amendment, and I think we should all make sure that we have personal protection. For just in case, if the slippery slope proves true, there is the slippery slope fallacy. But if this one proves true and we start sliding into a little bit more of that, as people say, Orwellian, 1984, Ministry of Truth. People talk about Animal Farm, how the elites, the pigs, slowly take away your rights and slowly move you into a state of totalitarian terror. We should always remain cognizant. But I digress. Is free speech a philosophical concept or just U.S. law? It is a philosophical concept. So just because the government isn't suppressing your free speech doesn't mean that it isn't being unduly suppressed by somebody else. Because essentially Google and Facebook, Twitter, Apple, all these companies, Amazon, they become so big, so influential, that they become post-governmental entities. They're so big that they have more influence and sway than some of the biggest governments, and certainly some of the smallest ones, but even some of the biggest governments in the world don't have as much influence as Google with their algorithms. They can do all sorts of things with public perception and conditioning that Russia or even China could barely think of. Of course, China and Russia have probably, I think China has, but Russia certainly should partner with Google and get their social conditioning on, their cultural engineering. As I talked about in last week's video with the God Goggle tweet. So the next question here is the public square a platform or a publisher? So I think that because a platform is different. A publisher has curation rights. They can make all the decisions they want. They can arbitrarily decide, we don't want to publish your book or your tweet or your Facebook post or your thing, whatever it might be. We don't have to. We're a publisher. We have liability. Okay, so we can't publish you if it's going to harm us. Now, platforms don't have liability. They ideally don't have liability. And in fact, they are protected under certain US codes. There are ways that they are also, these platforms, these publishers, electronic empires are subsidized by the US government as well. And in fact, Twitter is seen as a utility for providing the president's commentary to the public and other public officials. And there's also other services that run through these social media platforms, but of course they're treated like they have curation rights. So there's this publisher platform divide. Talked about this many times on the channel. And sometimes the problem is that these companies have the curation rights of a publisher and the lack of liability of a platform, and then they make these arbitrary decisions about who can speak, and that really does craft the narrative, the public dialogue, the overarching, the big waves, the little waves, as Spreadsheeticus would say, they're crashing. It does manipulate these movements and give more air to certain ideas and less air to others, and so we should be aware of who's controlling the story, who's controlling the narrative of reality. And I don't think that these companies should be. Of course, we have individual agency. We can use other sources of information. We can go on the internet. We can go read a book. We can go talk to people in the street and get the fuller picture. Of course, we should always be aware, don't just stay on one website or one echo chamber online, one subreddit. We should always be trying to make sure that we have a wider view, and then return to the echo chamber as a vacation home when we need a little bit more stability and just want those good feels, as you know. So I say that the public square is a platform. Okay, I don't think that Facebook should be liable for all the CP in their database, for example. But at the same time, they can't be censoring people willy-nilly. Like, we can't even talk about certain things on their website. They don't have any liability, and yet they're curating as if they do have liability. And of course, there may be some very litigious lawyers out there that might try to sue Facebook or sue people over what's going on. So thinking in absolutes is a fool's errand, and I'm trying to give you as many sides of the story as possible.